Alright, hey guys, we're doing a question and answer video today. We're gonna try and do these on Wednesdays. We asked for the questions on Instagram this time, so if you're not following Sam on Instagram, sometimes we'll get questions from there. I think that's it. Alright, the first question is, obligatory wins the next large lads question.
I've already made the intro, which is the hardest part. No, it's not the hardest part. Getting Max to get the fuck out of bed and actually do it is the hard part. He has verbally committed to this Friday. I will get it up for you guys on Friday. Got the intro already made. There's not a lot of editing past that. Should be Friday. If it's not, destroy him. End his life. Send him bombs in the mail.
Should you give him a hint?
He lives with us. Send him bombs in the mail, right?
Should you give him a hint about what the challenge is?
Should I just tell him or no? We're gonna have Max.
Well,
Max issued.
It.
I won't. Max issued the grip challenge last week. This challenge involves throwing. Is going to be our challenge for this week. So we'll see how that goes.
Is squatting hard one time a week enough to build monster horse legs?
So squatting hard once. Squatting hard once a week, implying you're doing like a good bit of volume, right? If you have genetic propensity for good legs, could you have killer legs doing predominantly squats once a week? Yes, absolutely. If you have more kind of run-of-the-mill leg genetics, you're probably going to want, I'm assuming you mean more than just squats, because squats will often be limited by your skill to some degree. That's kind of the stability argument, but a high skill lifter, I don't think their stability limits them too much, but how much volume you can do might be limited by your hips. It might be limited by the recovery capabilities of your lower back, depending on your leverages. And it might not be the most effective quad stimulus out there, again, kind of depending on both your technique, your mobility, and your leverages. But assuming you don't just mean squat training, but squat and squat assistance or squat and bodybuilding exercises, yeah, I think people can get pretty wicked wheels off of a lower frequency. If you really give it everything you've got and bury yourself that once a week, it can take you 5-6 days to recover. So once a week could work pretty well. I think most people might get slightly better results splitting that into 2 more moderate stimulations per week, but I think you can get really good results for legs in particular if you absolutely bury them with like hack squats and things that are going to be more targeted towards your legs and maybe have less of a limiting factor in terms of the lower back. But if it's something that doesn't come easy to you, I definitely don't think you're going to get your best gains off of a 1x frequency for leg training. So monster horse legs probably implies bodybuilding. If we're talking bodybuilding, 1x frequency can work pretty well for legs. Some people do, you know, quads and hams and adductors all together. Some people separate them out. You can get great results on a 1x frequency, whereas like something like biceps, if you're not genetically gifted, I think you are leaving more gains on the table without a 2x frequency.
And also, if you want to be skilled at the squat, doing it more than once a week is really helpful.
Yeah, unless you're a big boy and then, you know, 1x squat frequency fits in really well, or unless you have really poor outside the gym variables, maybe it's outside your control, maybe you work a physical job, maybe you got 1 billion kids, whatever it might be.
Billion.
Yeah, billion. You know, like good fundy family.
Right.
But yeah, that might get in the way, and then you might see better gains off of a 1x frequency. But yeah, technique, generally things we do more often, we get more skillful at. If I paid you $1 million to get good at, I say this in every podcast, I realize it's one of my talking points. If I paid you $1 million to get good at skipping rope, you'd probably skip rope 2 to 3 times a day to get good at it, right? Why don't we squat 2 to 3 times a day? Because there's a greater fatigue cost associated with squatting heavy than there is skipping rope. But the general principle of frequency is our tool for motor learning kind of still applies.
This person is wondering why their deadlift is failing just below the knee. They say they have a long torso, short arms, and a high hip position.
I mean, to be honest, a lot of the time you're looking at one of two things. One, you're pulled so far out of position, so it's like a positional maintenance issue. But usually that's just kind of hamstring, that strength as you're passing the knee in a conventional pull. A lot of the time that just comes down to getting your hamstring stronger. To be honest, it's one of my favorite sticking points for an athlete to have because you get wicked returns on just getting stronger on RDLs. You put in your volume in like, I don't know, 6 to 12, then you take it a little lower, maybe you do 4 to 6s, and it tends to attack that sticking point pretty directly. And because we're attacking the sticking point pretty directly with our secondary deadlift variation, the carryover tends to be pretty direct. So I definitely feel comfortable answering that one. A lot of the time it'll be sorted out with just good relatively neutral. Like neutral is a range, it's not a position, yada, yada, yada. I'm familiar with all these like evidence-based PT kind of talking points. But we want to be using our hip extensors as the prime mover more than our erectors. So there's not this active flexion extension quite as much. That is one way, I would call that an erector bias RDL, and there's a time and a place. I would do either a hamstring or a glute bias RDL. So the amount of knee bend almost matters less, but we're really looking for kind of a neutral back. A lot of that work is being done at the hip. RDL, get stronger across a variety of ranges and you'll be pretty good in terms of attacking that weakness.
I can answer this one for you.
Oh, let's go.
How to get out of a bench rut. Post-cut, low energy, strength, etc. Eat more food.
You heard it here. Let's fucking go. Well, I mean, if you're post-cut, it means the cut's done. Absolutely, gradually ramping your calories back up will go a long way in terms of regaining your bench momentum. The big mistake people make coming off of a cut is just repeatedly, okay, my calories are back in. Your strength is going to be down with loss in body weight. Not all of that is just depletion of glycogen. Lifting at heavier body weights tends to be easier. So really just start with things that are manageable and give yourself a little runway. Give yourself some time for that caloric surplus to take effect, rather than what people do, like I have the battering ram analogy. They start right up against that door and they don't draw it back against, and they're pissed that door won't get out of their way. So it's like if you just keep attempting bench workouts that you were able to do before, you're going to be very frustrated. It's going to take longer to get your bearings going again than if you bite your ego, start a little bit like, I don't know, it's going to be percentage based, but pull it back 10, 20, 30% lighter than what you want to do, and give yourself a little runway as you reacclimate, add that back in those calories to presumably what's going to be a surplus now.
How would you structure a 10-week block for lower body? Megalodon 10 week is awesome, by the way.
So that's the bench program on my Patreon, by the way. It's the only thing on there, but I'm glad to hear you liked it. Really, if you wanted to get real zoomed out, so you want a 10-week kind of macro cycle, usually kind of similar to what we do in that 10-week bench program, I would allocate a little bit more time to hypertrophy, just a little bit less time to strength and peaking phases, because most of us just need more muscle. It is the rare individual that isn't kind of the easiest area to attack getting our squat and our deadlift up. So 4 weeks of hypertrophy training, 3 weeks of strength training, 3 weeks of peak training. How would we break that up? Really, if we wanted to zoom out, we would say the hypertrophy, that 4-week phase, is about building as much high-quality volume in the 60 to 75% range, right? We're not building volume by whatever means necessary, meaning, oh, yeah, I got a bunch of reps, but there's a ton of breakdown. Usually your result and your transition into maximal weights will be a lot better if we build as much volume as we can with minimal deviation. So rather than do like a 10 rep max where the last 4 reps look kind of shitty, I'd rather see that same lifter do like, I don't know, a couple of sets of 6 and build more total reps with a higher average rep quality. Sure, we didn't get to hit that cool rep PR, but I really think like viewing your hypertrophy block through that lens of total good reps and trying to build kind of PR levels of total good reps, and that's the lens through which we do. Then we move into a strength phase where I think we can switch that focus from trying to build total good reps to rep PRs, again with minimal kind of deviation in technique. There's going to be some wiggle room. You know, one of the first things I was told when I was lifting was like, hey Sam, there's going to be breakdown on a max effort lift, and that isn't the end of the world. If anything, it informs a lot of what you should work on your next training cycle. But there's also weights we should probably leave for next training cycle that you could get done by just turning your deadlift into a shit show. Your overall progression might be smoother if you wait till you can do it a little cleaner. And that was a mistake I made. I hit my first 500 way earlier than I should have, and then my road from 500 to 525 was a lot harder than if I had paced myself out properly and waited till I could do it just a little bit better. But yeah, we're trying to build, you know, good looking rep PRs through the strength phase, 4 to 6 rep range, a hypertrophy phase being like 6 to 12, 6 to 10, something like that. Try to build volume in that 70 to 85 rep range, hit rep PRs in that 70 to 85 kind of percent range. And then the peaking phase, we're looking at top singles, kind of in that 85 to 100% range. And what we're looking for is not necessarily a huge double PR. We're looking for ability PRs, and then maybe we hit some doubles and triples for backoffs. That's really kind of how I would look at structuring it. And then we'd have maybe a primary day, a secondary day. The secondary day is a variation that attacks your weakness on your squat or your deadlift. A lot of the time might be just a pause squat and like a stiff leg, or a pause squat and RDL as our secondaries. Yeah, but I like that framework of hypertrophy is about total volume PRs, strength phase is about rep PRs. And then the peaking phase is about ability PRs. Rather than hitting a shitty looking, grindy, very fatiguing max effort triple, I would love to see a really crispy, the technique that we think is going to hold up the best with maximal weight single at RPE 8 at that same weight. It carries a little bit less fatigue. It stimulates the nervous system almost as much, I would say. And I think it leads to a smoother peak. So if we can think of that total volume, rep PR, ability PR, into that final week where we go for a PR, we'll be able to lay things out well. And then the number of work sets you do in each of these phases is really just kind of dependent on your own ability to recover. Hanging out around an RPE 7 through the hypertrophy phase, kind of 8 to 9 for those rep PRs, and then 8 to 9 for those ability PRs through the peaking phase. You'll probably do a pretty good job. A lot of it, past that just comes down to selecting your volumes well.
I feel like that also answers the question about setting up a training cycle too. So
yeah,
two birds, one stone.
Yeah, it's nothing unique to me. It's just kind of traditional American block periodization, but it can be done better and it can be done worse. I think a lot of the time when you're selecting your volumes, I do like to err on the side of minimum effective volume rather than maximum recoverable volume. I kind of err on the side of maximum recoverable volume for like the isolation bodybuilding work we do after these, and then what do I need to do to be ready for the next week's minimum effective dose for the volume on the main lifts.
Somebody also asked how Max is doing.
He's doing good, I think. His training is going pretty good. I think he just wrapped up his hypertrophy phase. We ran an extended hypertrophy phase. He was having a little bit of problems with his low back. Nothing super bad, but we ran an extended hypertrophy phase. He caught up a lot of the things that we felt was lagging, like his RDL strength, namely. He's been hammering away on a new belt squat. Should be in a pretty good spot for some PRs this training cycle, and then I think he's going to look for his next competition.
What is your favorite aspect of being a coach that caters to more serious strength fans?
What do you think it means?
I think he
like in terms of like what in my day makes it easier to get stronger, or like what is something I do as a coach that other people that are serious strength fans might find is interesting?
So that's the way I interpreted it the first time. So you answer it that way, and then you could answer it the other way.
Yes, I mean, I guess what people that are real strength nuts would find interesting is the amount I can observe. Like, I'm very lucky to work with some very strong people, some people that are stronger than me. I coach people that deadlift more than me. I coach people that squat more than me. Don't coach anyone that benches more than me yet, so looking for that one. But I get to observe the mentalities and the commonality of mentality and warm-up routine and kind of attitude of high performers and find what the overlap is. It's cool to see what's unique about guys, but it's really interesting to see, man, the guys that really see a lot of success share this in terms of how they talk about their training, how they talk about their goals, how they talk about their down periods. I think it's giving...
Comment if you guys want a full video on that.
Yeah, that'd be a hard one to organize to put my thoughts together, but it's something that I've learned a ton from just observing like what are the commonalities and the people that squeeze the most juice out of their training. Not even just, oh, well, what do the genetic elite do, but the guys I think have more average genetics I coach. But I'm like, man, you are really batting above your league. Like you're doing, crossing your T's, dotting your I's, like a high performer in that regard. What is the commonality in how they talk about their training? I think that's just really interesting. And it's very much kind of helped me with making sure that I'm crafting my mentality to lead to the best results I can. And then I also think it's interesting, like a big part of coaching isn't just writing a good program. It's how you communicate with the athlete to try to coax a better result out of them. So it's like identifying which guys are going to be like, respond best to me just being like, you are being a pussy, stop doing that. Some guys respond really well to that and some people fire you, right? Versus the other thing where it's like some guys respond a lot better to kind of pitter-pattering around issues to keep their confidence high. And people might say that's soft, but it's like really, I don't care what's the cool mentality. I care about results. So I think that part is kind of interesting. Honestly, as far as like being a strength coach, what it does for my schedule, it's flexible, right? That can be good, that can be bad. I know a lot of people that have strong lifters that thought that they could go to the next level by starting coaching, so they have a flexible schedule, and like the financial insecurity that comes with it. And some people just can't set their own schedule, that they actually went back to working regular jobs. A lot of the strongest guys I coach just work regular jobs and have really optimized their schedule around that, right? Like Jasper, the pro strongman I coach, works a very, I want to say he's like a mechanical engineer type dude, machinist, something like that. And he just works around it. He takes his heavy days on the days he doesn't have work. He's figured out a way to eat around his schedule to optimize for his training as a pro strongman. And honestly, a lot of the strongest guys I coach have kind of forayed into that and gone back to working 9 to 5 that they find are accommodating for their job. Like they're allowed to take their breaks to eat, but the financial security that comes with that, unless you're like a top coach, can sometimes be a big win. But that being said, you can absolutely take advantage of that flexibility. It's easier to get my meals in than it would be otherwise. But some guys really fail to capitalize on that. Like Big Laws actually said he was almost better when he was a little busier because he was forced to be like more analytical and what really matters and be good with my time. Whereas like some guys almost kind of fall apart when they're left to their own devices too much.
This guy says, increasingly enjoying zombie squats. Any benefit to peaking them beyond them being cool?
Do you know who this guy is? It's Caspian.
I was just gonna say, based on your hat.
Honestly, yeah, you could you guys using that as a Discord thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, honestly, I think there's a totally reasons you might want to take a zombie squat towards a peak, right? It reinforces a stricter movement quality, right? When we do a proper front rack, we have a good bit of backwards pressure on the bar, which means our torso can pitch more than it can in a zombie squat, right? So it's a good self-limiting variation. So it's like, let's say we were pushing your deadlifts really, really hard and we wanted to spare some energy. An RPE 10 zombie squat is just gonna be less taxing than an RPE 10 front squat because there's less breakdown that's allowed before it's just a miss. Right? It also, we might want to test the upper limits of what we can do in that really pure squat pattern without really kind of letting the hips rise and turning into a little bit of a hinge, right? So it's like, if someone just has that propensity, like Caspian does, to turn everything into a back extension, then it's like, okay, maybe we are really concerned with that upper end strength, right? Because Greg Knuckles talked about you have this hinge to squat continuum, right? A zombie squat's pretty goddamn far down that squat side. Doesn't get too much more squatty than that. Whereas if we allow that deviation by using a front rack, it gets a little bit more hingy. So for an athlete that's a weakness, maybe that is our metric for, hey, are we doing a good job bringing up this weakness? So self-limiting variation or really holding us like strict with the motor pattern. Those be two reasons that maybe we don't switch back to a front squat. We stay peeking through with the zombies and look at our maximal strength on those. You know, I'm pretty free to rotate those in because it's always a good idea to kind of clean up your cadence and the habits that the front rack lets us get away with a front squat. We're going to front squat better if we don't rely on those habits constantly. So doing volume with zombies. All my strongmen generally front squat. I think it's a good idea. It's a good use of time. And I think that periods where we take away their front rack or even take away their cross grip and hold them to that more rigorous motor pattern always feels good when they come back to it. So yeah, I'm a big fan of even keeping those in through a peak.
All right, what is the back extension equivalent for overhead movements for pre-fatigue warm-ups?
Okay, so me and Kirsten were kind of discussing what we thought he meant. We're assuming he means he does back extensions prior to deadlifts to warm up and maybe to pre-fatigue a little bit. And he's not saying, oh, like I do hamstring curls before I back extension, that way I don't have to use so much weight. We're going with the back extensions being before the deadlifts. So I guess it really depends on what you're looking to be the rate limiter, right, in your overhead press. If we're assuming the shoulders are the rate limiter, we're treating it as a shoulder exercise. Eddie Hall always used to do like high rep dumbbell presses without a lockout. Could do it with a lockout, to be honest, prior to a lot of his heavy overhead event training, like his heavy log presses, both to build up work capacity in the shoulder, make sure they were thoroughly warm, make sure you didn't pick up any rotator cuff tweaks, build in some volume, and also to pre-fatigue, because he always says, oh, well, I'm always tired when I do it in a contest. Why would I do the log press while fresh? And I have done periods of trying that out because Eddie Hall's shoulders are pretty strong. I figured it was worth a try. So I came into the gym and I would build up over time. And I built up a pretty wicked work capacity. I think I was doing like the 80s for like 30 to 40 reps and then my heavy strict presses. And really, by the end, it wasn't even taken away from my performance on the heavy strict presses once my capacity had reached a high point. So I would say high rep seated dumbbells might be what you're looking for, similar to how you use back extensions to make sure you're like fully warm and potentially pre-fatigue a little bit before your hinges. You could absolutely use high rep dumbbell presses in a similar way akin to what Eddie Hall did. He calls it like constant tension technique. We now kind of know that constant tension maybe isn't a defining variable for making a set useful, but I think that time under strain can have some implications for strongman, as well as like, was he doing a lengthened partial? Most people would probably say no because he wasn't going like as deep as possible, but in some ways, sure. He was trimming some work at the top to get in more work towards the bottom. We used to trash people saying that's a no rep. Suddenly those are lengthened partials. You know, that's how the cookie crumbles. What was dumb is now smart. Answer. So what was the question?
How do you determine if the technique you use for the big three doesn't work well for hypertrophy?
I mean, range of motion is going to be a really, really big component
You
there.
should put your hat back on regular style.
What's that? I don't look cool.
Can't take you seriously.
All right, so I mean, like, range of motion is going to be a really, really big component of that, right? A lot of competitive techniques for SBD that are going to let you lift more weight are going to do so via ROM reduction. But the other thing that, like, is good technique in powerlifting and is bad technique in bodybuilding is trying to do the task with as many muscle groups as possible. Whereas you could definitely argue in a lot of ways effective bodybuilding training is really kind of disadvantaging your leverages to make the group, like, to make it as taxing as possible on a target muscle. Now, that's kind of the modern interpretation of bodybuilding where everything needs to be exercise for a specific muscle group. Like, I was just listening to Basement Bodybuilding talk about how he likes his back exercises to be emphasizing the traps, the lats, or whatever the hell else, rear delts, whatever else he said. Oh, erectors. So that was the other major one he listed. And he wants an exercise that doesn't just do like a pretty good job of all three. He would like it to be directed at one. I think there's a time and a place for things that are more kind of painting with a broad brush. It's a back exercise, not a lat exercise, that type of deal. But I think a lot of the time we want to disadvantage certain muscles. Generally speaking, a good squat for bodybuilding is going to disadvantage the quads, bias the quads as much as possible, and not use the hip extensors quite as much, right? Whereas a good squat for powerlifting is going to distribute that task across as many primary movers as we can and reduce the range of motion as much as we can within the rules to allow us to lift as much weight as possible. Thus, a little bit more vertical shin angle, a little bit wider stance, more hips back you might see in powerlifting to distribute across the primary movers, whereas the narrower stance, knees pushed much more forward, more upright torso you might see for bodybuilding to bias towards the quads. So I would say the main criteria you're looking at, right, is range of motion. And then if we're trying to bench for our chest, there's a certain way we might want to bench for our chest. If we're trying to bench for our triceps, there's a certain way we want to bias towards the triceps. So biasing towards certain primary movers are going to be kind of the things that inform whether the way we're squatting, benching, and deadlifting are good for hypertrophy, because good for hypertrophy is kind of dependent on the target muscle, or whether we probably could be getting a bit better results. Those are just kind of pop to the top of my head. If you guys can think of another obvious criteria, please let me know. I'm doing these all off the top of my head. Oh, I'm all ears.
If your form looks like it would be a meme shitting on powerlifting, then it's probably not good for hypertrophy.
Yeah, people would use it as an example of why powerlifting is whack. It's probably not a good bodybuilding exercise.
I don't know. I just feel like I'm a silly goose.